Hi, and welcome to Show Me UX. I'm Bill, the User Experience Designer, and in this video, I'm going to cover the basics of groups and frames in Figma. Let's get started. In order to illustrate the difference between groups and frames, let's first begin with the groups. You may have noticed that there is no group tool in the toolbar. This is because, as a layer, groups cannot exist without child elements. And to demonstrate this, I will select this rectangle layer, right-click, and select Group Selection. As we can see in the Layers panel, we have a new layer called Group 1, and if we click the downward arrow, we'll see that it has the child element, Square. And to show that the group layer cannot exist without child elements, I will click and drag this layer called Square outside of Group 1, and we can see that the Group 1 layer has disappeared. Multiple layers can be grouped as well, and to do this we will click and drag to select the layers we want. Alternatively, we can select the layers in the Layers panel, then we'll right-click and again select Group Selection. And just like before, we can see that we have a new group called Group 1, and if we click the downward arrow, we can see all three of the child elements, text, circle, and square. With the group layer still selected, if we click and drag, we'll notice that the shape layers, that is the rectangle layer as well as the ellipse layer, change their size according to the width and the height of the group layer. We'll also notice that the type layer, while the size of the font does not change, we can cause it to break line depending on how narrow we make the group. I'll undo this. Additionally, the bounding box of the group, that is to say, this blue line on the top, right, bottom, and left that shows how large the container is, will change depending on the size of the child elements. To illustrate this, I will select the rectangle layer called Square, and I'll make it a bit larger. And then I'll reselect the group layer, and we can see that the bounding box has changed accordingly. Another way of illustrating this would be to select, say, the circle layer and move it down and reselect group. And as we can see again, the bounding box has indeed changed. I'll go ahead and undo this for now. That's it for the basics of groups. Before we continue on with frames, I'm going to go ahead and select all of the child elements of Group 1 and remove them from that layer so that we can start fresh. Frames, sometimes called artboards and other design applications, are similar to groups in that frames act as containers or parents for other layers or child elements. However, this is where the similarity to groups end. Frames can be added to the canvas by locating and selecting the Frame tool located here in the toolbar. You can also press F to use the keyboard shortcut to select the Frame tool. Much like with shapes, with the Frame tool selected, you can click and drag in the canvas to create a frame of a given width and height. Alternatively, with the Frame tool still selected, you can click once in the canvas to add a frame with a default width and height. As we can see by looking at the Layers panel on the left, the frame I added to the canvas, called Frame 1, exists independently. That is to say, it does not require any child layers for it to exist on its own as a layer. Furthermore, frame sizes are not dependent on their child elements, like groups are. To help illustrate this, I will select the star shape from the Tools menu, and I will add a small star to the canvas inside of the frame, thus making the star layer a child element of Frame 1. As we can see, Frame 1 does not resize automatically to fit the size of the child element, in this case, the star shape. If we wanted to resize the frame so that it fits the children, we would first select the frame, and then in the design panel, we would select this option, Resize to Fit. And as we can see in the canvas, the frame size has resized itself to accommodate only the size of the child layer. To add additional child layers to the frame, we can select elements on the canvas and click and drag them until they're inside the bounding box of the frame, or we can go to the Layers panel on the left, find the layer we want to add to the frame, and click and drag it until it's inside the frame. As we can see, I moved the layer called Circle inside of frame. However, looking at the canvas, it appears that Circle has disappeared. We know this is not the case because we can still see the bounding box. But what is causing this behavior? In order to find out why this is happening, we can select the frame layer and examine the design panel here on the right. We'll notice that an option called Clip Content is selected. When we uncheck Clip Content, we'll notice that the circle layer has reappeared. Clip Content is turned on by default and hides any child element outside of the bounding box of the frame, making it invisible. If we want to have Clip Content turned on, but also see all of the elements inside of the frame, we would need to select Resize to Fit. And, as we can see now, we have both child elements, that is, the layers Star1 and Circle, inside of the frame. In order to best demonstrate how constraints work, I want to remove the current frame layer from the canvas. To do this, I will select the frame layer. As we can see, it is already selected, and I will press the Delete key. However, since both the star shape and the ellipse shape layers were children of the frame, they were deleted also. In order to save a layer, in this case the circle, I need to first click and drag it outside of the frame. And I can do this either by clicking and dragging it in the canvas or in the Layers panel here on the left. I will click and drag it so that it's between the text and the square layer. Now, since that layer has been removed as a child, I will click again on the frame layer and press Delete. I will reselect the frame tool, pressing F on my keyboard to select it, and in the canvas I will click and drag to create a new frame, about this size. And in order to illustrate how constraints work, I need to add a child element to the frame, so I will select the Ellipse tool, which is keyboard shortcut O, and I will click and drag inside of the frame to make the ellipse, that is the shape layer, a child element of the frame. As we can see, we now have a child element called Ellipse 1 inside of our frame parent called Frame 1. If we look in the canvas at the shape layer, we can see a dotted line coming out of the top and the left of the shape layer. This corresponds to what we see in the design panel on the right in the constraints section. In this icon box, we see two thick blue lines coming from the top and from the left of this square shape. This corresponds to the dotted line that we see in the canvas. Constraints allow child elements of a frame to maintain their position when a frame is resized. If, for instance, I select this frame and by clicking on the left side of the bounding box, I change the width, we can see that the shape layer, the ellipse, stays exactly how many pixels it was in the beginning from the left side. This is because it's constrained to the left side. We can also see that it's constrained to the top. So if I select the frame and reduce the height of the frame, we can see that it maintains the same distance from the top. And of course, if I change both the width and the height at the same time using the upper left side handle, it also stays where it is meant to be. With the shape selected, we can select constraints using the icon box, or we can select where we want the shape to be constrained from by clicking the drop-down arrow and selecting left and right, center, and scale, or top and bottom, center, and scale. In a future video, I will discuss constraints more thoroughly. Lastly, I will give a quick demonstration of the layout grid. In order to illustrate this best, I will delete the ellipse layer, that is, the child layer of the frame. Since it's selected, I can press the delete key to get rid of it. In order to add a layout grid to a frame, I need to select the frame layer, which I can do by clicking on it in the canvas or by selecting it in the Layers panel here on the left. With the frame selected, if we look at the Design panel here on the right, we will notice the Layout Grid section. There is no layout grid currently applied to this frame, so we can add a new one by clicking the section. By default, Figma will add a 10 by 10 pixel grid to the frame. We can choose one of 3 different types, including the grid, by clicking the icon to the left of the grid type with the tooltip Layout Grid Settings. Here we have a box that allows us to change the appearance of the grid. If I want to change the grid type, I can click the down arrow and select Grid, Columns, or Rows. Columns will display, of course, columns on top of the frame, which we can control setting these parameters here. Alternatively, we can also select rows, wherein we see a similar set of parameters. I also intend to do a future video thoroughly discussing the ins and outs of the layout grid. But for now, we're done with this lesson. I hope you liked this video. If you did enjoy the content, please consider commenting, liking, and subscribing to Show Me UX for more videos like this in the future. I'll see you next time.